we look at what is the role of performance information, why do we collect this? We started off with some of the reasons, okay? We want to reward success rather than failure. We want to learn from our failures we want to learn from our successes and be able to correct our failures. So, certainly in the education Eastern Cape, there is a failure there in their information gathering system, so we want to correct it. So what do? We do an audit of the information, complete audit. Okay, so the first, why do we collect information? Policy development and planning, and evaluation. We want to know whether CAPS is working. We want to know whether the learner-teacher support materials, the workbooks that education has produced, are actually making a meaningful difference in the standard of results that we're getting from grade 3 and grade 9. I mean, if they're not, then we must turf the initiative. We're wasting paper, we're cutting down trees unnecessarily. Okay, so we want to look at it, information for the purposes of policy evaluation and policy development. The second one is fairly mundane, planning, budgeting, and monitoring. Why do we need to know the correct number of pupils in the Eastern Cape? Budgeting, because we allocate schools funds on the basis of the number of pupils at the school. And if everybody is lying by 10%, then you're going to be allocating 10% over your budget. We also need the information for post-provisioning. You've got to know exactly how many people are in the school, what grade they are, what subjects they are taking, in order to ensure that there's a fair allocation of teachers across schools. Now, I've looked at this recently, and I can say that, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done on post-provisioning. Okay? How else? Your monitoring. You've got your schools, your dinner lady schools. How were they identified? On the basis of the matric results. Okay, so we then identify these schools that need special maths and science interventions, and we design a program in order to address that particular problem. Okay, reporting for accountability purposes. You go to Parliament, or you come to National Treasury more correctly, and you ask for money. That gets put into the budget, your request, or 10% of your request gets put into the budget. And it then goes to Parliament. Parliament votes that money. Now remember, there are two sides to every budget. There's a tax side, and there's an expenditure side, or let's call it a revenue side and an expenditure side. The revenue side is taking money from the taxpayers. And there's only one institution in the country that has permission to take money from the taxpayers. No, it's not SARS. Who's that? It's Parliament. Only Parliament can pass legislation to impose taxes on the electorate, on the citizens, on the businesses of this country. All that SARS does is implement that legislation. Okay? SARS is just an implementing agent. But the institution that makes the decision to take money from you and I is Parliament. Okay? And Parliament also decides where that money will be spent. That's the expenditure side of the budget. Now, Parliament needs to hold the spending agents of government accountable for the money that is being given them, so that they can justify to the taxpayers why we should all pay a marginal rate of 40% on the money that we earn. Okay, so this is accountability. People want to know, what was the money spent on? And when you have the money being spent on a certain homestead, people are upset. Okay, because that was not a priority on people's to-do list when they were paying SARS. Okay? They would prefer the money to be spent on policing or on education. And this is part of accountability monitoring, that we can show that the money has been used in this way. And the taxpayers are therefore happier to pay their taxes. Who remembers getting an SMS from SARS last year? And it's not only the large taxpayers that got an SMS. Okay? Do you remember? It said, thank you for paying your taxes. Okay?
That's why some people don't do it.
Is it a bad memory? Okay. And you saw these big billboards on going to the airport that says, your taxes help provide education. Your taxes fund the armed forces to protect the country. Your taxes, and there was all these thank you notes from the taxpayer to the from the tax receiver of revenue to the taxpayers. Did you feel good about that?
Yes, we did.
I was rather impressed that they actually had my cell phone number. I was a bit worried as well. Okay.
I think they are one of the best institutions.
Yeah, no, it gave you the impression that they were doing well. Now, if you as a government can show that the money is being used appropriately, that's going to stand you in good stead when it comes to asking the voters to vote for you again. So this accountability loop is very important. Then your performance management, and this is going down into the department. Your performance bonus, do you earn it? And you need to be able to check whether you've done your job or not. How are you going to do that? You do it on the basis of management information. Who signs a performance agreement? It's a rubbish process. Okay? Why is it a rubbish process? Because we don't take it seriously. Okay? The performance agreement only has meaning if there are clear deliverables in that performance agreement, and if you're monitored on a quarterly basis as to whether you have delivered against it. That doesn't happen. Not in Treasury, not in this department, I'd be surprised. Okay? We sign them and we evaluate them at the end of the year. But we don't do it on a quarterly basis, do we?
We do.
Okay, congratulations. I learned something new. Yes?
If the whole organization gets a display, and when I look at my contract with my supervisor, I realize that I've performed as expected, but the organization got a display. And SCOPA says all those people who got a performance bonus must return the money.
That is within the rights of SCOPA, because remember, they're the custodians of that accountability. Okay? They are watching how the tax dollars are, well, not tax dollars, tax rands are spent. And if they feel that as the person that gave the money to the department, you're not getting value for money, and a qualified or disclaimer is evidence that they're not getting value for money, then as the principal, they're entitled to make a decision like that. I'm not saying that it's necessarily a fair decision, okay? But what I'm saying is that is the relationship of the Parliament relative to the administration. What would be fairer is for them to recognize that a disclaimer is primarily a management responsibility. And let me make it more clear, a senior management responsibility. So from director level upwards. Okay, if you're part of the SMS, you sign up for senior management. And that is where they should probably draw the line and say senior management needs to work as a team in order to improve the audit outcomes. Now, as you all know, when you were at school, if one child spoke and the class was kept in by the teacher, you all felt angry because that wasn't fair. Okay? That's the nature of group punishment. It isn't fair on somebody. But it creates the peer pressure for people to start putting things right. And that is what Scopa is trying to move towards. They don't have the information to say this manager, that manager, that manager didn't do their job. And so what do? They use a blunt instrument to respond. If you had more refined instruments that were able to distinguish between performing managers and non-performing managers, then Scopa may be more sympathetic and say, okay, you know, we recognize that there's some good people that are doing their work, and we're going to allow them to keep their performance bonuses, but those that are not doing their work, they have been justifiably penalized by not being allocated a performance bonus. But Scopa looks and they ask, what percentage of managers got performance bonuses? And the senior management says, well, we're a brilliant department. We got a disclaimer, but we gave 100% performance bonuses. And then it doesn't match up. Yeah.
Well, my problem with performance management being linked to
organizational performance.
Organizational performance linked with the incentive, monetary incentive, is that I think it does lose some sort of, it has unintended consequences.
Yeah.
That you end up not looking at the actual delivery and performance per se, but there's always, especially at the end of the year, you know, it's one of the
stressful times.
Very stressful, because regardless of what has happened in the quarterly performances, in terms of the individual understanding what was supposed to be delivered, what are the outcomes and all the other things, regardless of all that information being there. But once it comes to the annual aspect, where now there is money, the focus is not around performance, the overall performance. The focus is whether or not are you going to recommend me for this.
Yeah. No, and that's where
the other part, which is not good in a sense, is that it's not the individual. Because I can assure you, I think this happens throughout all departments, that round about that time, love is lost between a manager and whoever. You are the one who actually stands between me and that money, which I don't even know how much it is, because I'm not going to receive anything. So you stand between me and them. So I think it's unintended consequence, but I think it can be rectified somehow.
No, it can't be rectified.
Okay.
Okay. Performance bonuses and performance management are always a tough process. And as senior managers, one needs to face up to that. If you're thinking of being a popular senior manager, you know, think again. Because the best you can strive for is that in your own mind, you know that you've been fair through the process. There are always going to be happy people, and there are always going to be people that are unhappy with the performance management process. And even your good performers will sometimes be unhappy, because they might have been expecting a level A plus, and you gave them a level A, which is fair. They still get a performance bonus, but their expectations were higher. And so it's always going to be a conflictual, difficult process. And what we need to face up to is how do we create systems that are fair and that results in a general acknowledgement that the process is fair. And that is where performance information becomes critical, that you then use evidence-based information that says, yes, you did your job, or no, you did not. You know, it becomes a case of, where's the report? No, the report doesn't exist. Fine, then that is evidence. The person can't argue with that. It's not a subjective process anymore. And this is the important part of performance management. Okay. Very briefly, I hope you've seen this picture before. If you haven't, I want to ask you, where have you been? Okay, this is basically how government functions on a single slide. You have policy development by Parliament, provincial legislature, you have oversight. I'll come back to that. You have policy development. That happens within national departments and provincial departments. They both have a policy role. You then take those policies and you say, okay, which of them are we going to implement in a 5-year period? That is your strategic planning process. Okay, so CAPS is a strategic objective. It gets put into the strategic plan. That is something you then run with for the next 5 years as you develop it and implement it. You then need to fund that and do the operational planning. That's your budgeting and your APP process. Okay, that is the process for the current year. Then we have your implementation. You all get busy spending the money, delivering the goods and services, not delivering the textbooks as the case may be, and you have in-year reporting to check that the process is actually unfolding so that we can take corrective action if the textbooks are not being delivered. Okay, and then you have your end-year reporting. Now that is all very neat, and we wish that life worked in single-year cycles. The only problem is that all 4 of those processes are happening simultaneously all the time. Okay? Whilst you're implementing the budget, you're busy reporting on last year's expenditure. Whilst you're preparing this year's budget, you're busy implementing, next year's budget, you're busy implementing the current year budget. And so one needs to see this as a series of circles that are working in tandem with each other. And it makes things difficult. And the people who exercise oversight at the top find it very difficult. We've actually had proposals that we should only pass a budget once every 3 years so that we can catch up with ourselves. Okay.
Performance bonuses every 3 years.
Yeah, performance bonuses every 3 years as well. No, these have been serious proposals. I'm not joking. It's so that we can get a hang of the cycle. And the problem with this is it doesn't stop. You can't say, stop the bus, I want to get off. Well, you can leave the civil service. But so long as you're working within the civil service, this is the treadmill that you're on. The budget process stops for nobody. If you miss the deadlines, you snooze, you lose, it's gone. Come back next year. Okay? The same with the annual report. If you get the information wrong in the annual report, it goes to the Auditor General, he looks at what is there, that's the end of the story. Okay, so each of these processes just move, and one needs to have systems in place that can keep up with the process. Right, I'm not going to go through this. This is sort of a detailed information on all those planning and reporting documents. That's fairly straightforward. But let's come to sort of the exciting stuff.